Well, let's speak now to Mark Regev, Senior Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister and former Israeli Ambassador to the UK. Mr. Regev, welcome to you. Thank you very much for being with us. What is the latest on the hostages that you can share with us?
I'm afraid I have nothing new to say. Excuse me, we don't know that there's been any developments. I can say the following. Hamas is holding 240 people. There's a group of grandparents, people over 70 that they're holding, and there's also, I believe, 32 children, people under the age of 18, of which there are babies. There's a 9-month-old baby, and there's also toddlers, 3 years old, 4-year-olds. What sort of organization kidnaps babies and toddlers? And I think this just is a manifestation of what we're up against, who these Hamas killers are and what to expect from them.
We've seen one person rescued, 4 released. How hopeful are you, if at all, that more could be rescued or released?
Well, first of all, we worry because we know who has them. A brutal terrorist organization that showed us very graphically on October 7th the sort of violence it's capable of meting out against innocent civilians. And so we worry. Of course, we worry about the hostages. As for getting them out, we believe, since we have no illusions about Hamas, we don't believe they're suddenly going to become humanitarians. On the contrary, we expect the worst from them. And therefore, the only way to get our people out is to beef up the pressure on Hamas, to increase the pressure, the military pressure, to ratchet it up. We believe when they feel the pain, then we could get movement on the hostage issue.
Do you believe they are feeling the pain now? What's the latest you can tell us about the military operation? As your government has reported, you now have soldiers in the heart of Gaza City.
So obviously I can't go into ongoing operations, but I can say this, that we know that Hamas is feeling the pain, and we believe that is the way to get our people out. There's a parallel track going on through the Qataris. And Qatar has relations with Hamas. They host in their capital, Doha, they host the leadership of Hamas. And a lot of people have said, how can you host these killers, these rapists, these murderers, the butchers of children? Yes, how can you have a relationship with these people? And the Qatari government says, well, it's because we can use our good offices with Hamas and we can influence them in a positive way. So I think now, to use an English expression, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Can Qatar deliver the release of hostages? Because up until now, we rescued, as you correctly said. 4 have come out, 4 out of 240. That's not a good number. That's unacceptable. But they all have to be released.
Do you believe the Qataris have been instrumental in at least the release of those 4 people?
But any success has been so minimal, right? All the children, the 32 children are still there. That large group of elderly are still there. 4 out of 240, I think it's a number, it's a pitiful number. We want them all out. They all should be released now.
Mr. Regev, as the military operation intensifies, what is the definition of success now for Israel? What is the point at which you say we have achieved our goals?
So our goal is clear. We want to dismantle Hamas's terror machine in Gaza, their military machine, and we want to destroy their political control of the Gaza Strip. Hamas has been in power for 16 years. What have they bought the people of Gaza?
But how will you know? How will you know when that has been achieved?
When we've eliminated its leadership, when we've eliminated its military structure, when they no longer can control Gaza through the brute force that they've used up until now. That'll be good for the people of southern Israel, who won't have to live in fear of terrorists coming across the frontier and butchering their children. And it's also be good for the people of Gaza, who deserve a government that will ultimately look after their interests, and not these Hamas extremists who are willing to sacrifice every last Gazan on the altar of its extremist agenda.
As you suggested there, many people are asking, well, what does come next when eventually you say your military objective have been achieved? Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel would assume overall security in Gaza after the war ended. What does that mean in practice?
So I think it's important to distinguish between political control and a security envelope, so to speak. We don't want to rule over Gaza. We don't want to govern the people of Gaza. We prefer that they govern themselves. We have no intention to reoccupy the Gaza Strip. On the other hand, we can't ignore the security realities. We do so at a peril. And once we have defeated Hamas and eliminated them, we have to make sure there's not a resurgent terrorist movement, Hamas disciples, Hamas lookalikes, who come back. We won't go back to where we were on the morning of October 7th and sit around and wait for the next massacre. No, we will have an ongoing security presence. It doesn't have to be static. It could be that we go in and out when we need to quell terrorist threats.
Let me ask you about your staunchest ally, US President Joe Biden. He's made it clear he doesn't support an Israeli military reoccupation of Gaza. How do you intend to ensure your security unless you do reoccupy Gaza?
So once again, we don't want to reoccupy Gaza, but remember the territorial areas are very small. Yes, Israel's a small country and Gaza is even smaller than Israel. And so we think we can have security by maintaining this an envelope, a presence. It can be fluid. We can go in and go out as we need be.
Okay.
And the idea is to make sure our people are safe. And hopefully, in parallel, we'll see the development of a post-Hamas Gaza, a demilitarized Gaza, with a government that will actually care about its people.
And will you be asking the Palestinian Authority to take over Gaza? It's something that Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, certainly suggested, we understand, when he met with Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, earlier this week.
That's a difficult question to ask Israelis today, because we're just over a month since the terrible massacres of October 7th. And until today, the Palestinian Authority has refused to condemn the massacre of innocent civilians. And a lot of Israelis ask, across the political spectrum, left, right, center, they ask if the Palestinian Authority is incapable of condemning the rapes, the murders, the massacre, the burning of people alive, what sort of peace partner are they?
OK, Hamas, the Gaza-run health ministry, of course, run by Hamas, says more than 10,000 people have been killed in the past month. 4,000 of them children. What's your analysis of these figures and your reaction to those staggering numbers?
So we can't vouch for those numbers. And you say quite correctly that this is the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health, and they have obviously an interest in exaggerating the numbers and exaggerating civilian casualties. And what is interesting is because Hamas doesn't have a democratic regime in Gaza, it rules very authoritarianly. They control the numbers coming out of Gaza. They also control the pictures coming out of Gaza. To be frank, when you interview people in Gaza or when you have freelance journalists making reports in Gaza, they cannot do anything that would conflict with the Hamas party line, so to speak. If they do so, they face retribution. But
do you accept that civilians are dying in Gaza, even if you dispute the numbers? And if so, should the Israeli government be doing more to make sure that doesn't happen?
So, of course, there's tragedy in Gaza. Of course, we've seen innocent people caught up in the crossfire between Hamas and the Israeli Defense Forces. We don't want to see it, and we're doing our best to minimize the levels of collateral damage. The most important thing we've done is, of course, over the last 3.5 weeks, we've been calling on people to evacuate the north and move to the south, because the north is the scene of the most heavy and intensive fighting.
But the south is not safe either, is it? People are dying in the south.
I don't think you can compare the levels of violence, and you're not talking about the special humanitarian zone that's being established on the western part of the southern part of the Gaza Strip, along the coast, along the Mediterranean, where there isn't a Hamas infrastructure, where we're talking about establishing there a humanitarian safe zone with field hospitals. It's quite close to the Rafah crossing, and so the supplies coming in, the aid coming in, it's easy access for that. The French have talked about a hospital ship. We'll be encouraging others to do the same that can be off the coast to take in wounded people. The idea is, while this war is going on, yes, for there to be a safe space for Gazan civilians. And when the war is over, of course, people can go back to their homes. And if their homes have been destroyed in the war, and unfortunately so many homes have been, because Hamas has turned urban areas into a military machine for their terrorist purposes. But when this is over, we will support a reconstruction effort. We want to see a Gaza, a post-Hamas Gaza that is demilitarized and lives in peace with Israel. And that'll be good for Israel, and that'll be good for the Gazans too.
How confident are you that can happen in any immediate future?
I think if you say immediately no, it's going to be a long haul. We have no illusions that this can be done quickly. Hamas has governed Gaza for 16 years. They've dug in, they've built structures, they've built defenses. Our forces are now fighting them. We will win, but it won't be quick and easy. It will take a determined effort, a commitment by Israel to get the job done. But we have no choice, because what is the alternative? To live with this enclave on our southern border and just wait for the next terrorist attack? I'd remind you that the deputy leader of Hamas said was it 2 days ago in an interview on a Lebanese television station, he said, October 7th, we'll do it again and again and again. His words. In other words, if Hamas stays in charge of Gaza, we can just expect more horrific terrorist attacks against our people. That's not something we're willing to accept.
Mark Regev, let me just quickly ask you, because the AFP news agency is just reporting that Qatar is negotiating the release of some hostages in return for a Gaza ceasefire. Is that something that you would be willing to do, to agree to a ceasefire? And at what point would you need to be confident that hostages would be exchanged in return?
So in the past, there have been two pairs of hostages. The first group was 2 American women, and then there were 2 elderly Israeli women who were released by Hamas. And in the framework of those releases, we did a pause in the fighting, in the location of the release of the prisoners. We can do that sort of thing again. If there are more people released, obviously we would expand so. Of course, we've done countless humanitarian pauses since this has started to facilitate the entry of supplies for the people of Gaza, to allow them the corridor to move from the north to the south. Yes, we're open to those sorts of things.
OK, Mark Regev, thank you for your time. We do appreciate it.
My pleasure.